that people don't.
Should I hear from sir?
Okay.
Yeah. Can I have that for a minute? Can I have that? Ma, 2 minutes. Start. Hello.
Sir, I put it.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session. I hope you've all had a good lunch and you have enjoyed the meeting so far. We have a very interesting session in the afternoon and a very distinguished speaker, Dr. Tony Holland. I request Sharan to come up and introduce the speaker.
Okay, everyone. I will introduce to Tony Holland. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I would like to introduce Dr. Tony Holland. He is the key person in Cambridge Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Group, Department of Psychiatry, University of Cambridge, UK. He has undertaken research projects on investigations of the links between Down syndrome and the high risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. Today he is going to talk about understanding the changing needs of people with Down syndrome as they age. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharan, for that lovely introduction. Dr. Tony Holland is going to talk to us about growing older with Down syndrome, understanding the changing needs of people with Down syndrome as they age. We look forward to a lovely lecture from you, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much. Thank you all for inviting me here. It's been the most wonderful 2 days. And if there's one thing that I will take away back to the UK with me, and that is that you've achieved a lot, and you will absolutely achieve a lot more. The dynamism, the different enthusiasms that I've seen here is just fantastic. So keep going. It's really tremendous to see. What I want to do is just to briefly talk about the lifetime, what I've called here the lifetime trajectory of people with Down syndrome. But the same is true for all of us, that of course development is a process, and our brains develop over time, finally being fully developed in our early 20s. But at the same time, of course, we go through great changes in our social world, moving from the family and ultimately into greater independence. We need to understand this process so that we can understand how the needs of people with Down syndrome will change during their life course. I then want to look just a little bit of some of the particular health problems that arise with increasing age, and by that I mean into adult life and into later life. And then finally, I want to reflect on a very sensitive area, and that's this issue of the risk that people with Down syndrome have for Alzheimer's disease. I want to do that, and I'm going to do this in a rather different way. I'm going to give you examples of how we're using research in order to understand that link. because what I want you to do is to understand the potential benefits in terms of developing treatments in the future, but also help you understand how we begin to appreciate this risk of dementia, how it presents, how it goes over time, what we think is happening in the brain. So I'm going to take a rather research type of approach to that. And then finally, I'd want to reflect on some of these issues for India. I want to start, though, and there have been other presentations about this during the course of the last 2 days, to say perhaps what's incredibly important, not just for children, but also for adults with Down syndrome, and that is that a country gets the rights correct. And there is no question that having politicians and the law on your side is really very, very important. And in that context, of course, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability has been absolutely critical, and it's wonderful to hear that India was, I think, one of the earliest people to ratify that convention. And the convention talks about the right to education, to opportunities, but also to health. And it talks about health, including among children and older people. So one of the issues that it seems to me you can hold your government to is, are they providing for the needs of older people with Down syndrome as much as are they providing for the needs of younger people and for children with Down syndrome? And that's what I'm going to now reflect on in a little more detail. Again, you've heard about this, but one of the striking features is that the life expectancy of people with Down syndrome has improved enormously over the years. And here are some figures. This was taken from quite an old study by Braddock and colleagues in 1996. But you can see in the 1900s, and this was an American study, that the life expectancy in the general population was in the 40s, in the high 40s. But for people with intellectual disability generally, it was much lower than that. And for people with Down syndrome, it was even lower than that. Then you can see how it increased into the 1900s. And in the recent study undertaken by Bittles and colleagues in Australia, it is improving even further. And interestingly, he comments that life expectancy of people with Down syndrome is actually improving faster than the life expectancy of typically developing people is improving. Now, this, of course, is very good news. But along with that, it brings the issues of can we better understand and what are going to be the new needs that arise, because we now have a population of people with Down syndrome living into their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. What do we need to understand about that will help us plan for their health needs and perhaps consider the type of research that needs to be done in order to meet their needs? Again, someone mentioned this in an earlier talk yesterday. It's just worth pointing out that the factors that have perhaps resulted in improvements in life expectancy for people with Down syndrome are the same factors that have improved life expectancy for us all: better nutrition, improved living standards, treatment of infectious diseases, and so on and so forth. But also, of course, better access to health services and the development of new treatments. But of course, what this meeting is about is also about what is unique to people with Down syndrome. And in the case of life expectancy, I think, and again this was mentioned, the treatment of congenital heart disease has been crucial. But I've added a little bit in here, and that's about the issue of stigma and respect for the right to treatment. There was a period during my professional lifetime when there were clearly people with Down syndrome, children with Down syndrome, that were being denied treatment such as repair of heart disease or of congenital heart disease, possibly because they had Down syndrome. And that's, of course, not acceptable. They have as much right to heart surgery as anyone else, providing it's the right thing to do for them. So there is a sort of two-stage procedure here. There's the acknowledgement that, in this case, heart disease occurs in people with Down syndrome. But there's also the acknowledgement within your country and within your states that they need treatment and deserve treatment. And I think the other factor that has been important is to have much more informed health monitoring. So if you have doctors that are more informed about the thyroid disorders and so on that occurs in people with Down syndrome, then they're going to be much more attuned to the problems and help you as their family, as the families, and help the people with Down syndrome to remain well. Now, why are we so particularly concerned about adult life? And what, in a sense, about adult life is so particular that we need to have sessions on it in conferences such as these? I think there's one factor that people often are unaware of that I believe is really quite important and might help to account for some of the anxiety and mental health problems that occur. And that is this idea that, of course, as a child, the skills you need are less advanced. The skills you need to be able to engage in life and with other children are less advanced. But because once you become an adult, then the skills you need to be able to lead a fully independent life are more advanced skills. They're skills like the ability to plan, to organize, to manage money, and all those sorts of things. And what you find is for people with Down syndrome, what I've called here the ability gap gets bigger in adult life. So for you and I, it's been possible for us to learn to drive, to have a job, to manage our own money. But for someone with Down syndrome, that may not be possible. And sometimes you see in transition to adult life, that is actually very stressful, the realization that it's not possible to perhaps do the things that their siblings are doing. So I think that's one factor that one needs to be aware of. The other one is an obvious one, that changes in family and other support networks. And we've discussed in the last 2 days the problems of opportunities and access to employment and so on can be problematic. And this move from the structure of school to often the chaos and emptiness of adult life can be really problematic. And the third area you need to be aware of is for all of us, as we become adults, then risks for different illnesses begin to emerge. So I'm a psychiatrist. Psychiatric disorder conditions such as depression and major mental illness tend to be disorders of adult life. So these are disorders that may emerge in adult life. They weren't present in childhood. So that's a third factor you need to be aware of. As your son or daughter becomes an adult, you need to be aware that they will be at risk for the same sort of things that occur in adult life in all of us. But as I will discuss in a moment, there may be some risks that are higher in people with Down syndrome than it is for the typically developing population. So what are some of the key issues before I move into some of the particular psychiatric problems and the issue of dementia? Well, in a sense, the very obvious one, and I've discussed this with parents during the last 2 days, the importance for adult life of good childhood. Childhood, it's a trite thing to say, but childhood is the route into adult life. The care that you give your child, the opportunities you give your child, the education they have, are all helping them prepare themselves for adult life, as it does for any child. For someone with Down syndrome, it may require special support, it may require more time, and so on. So don't ignore the love and attention that you show your children. That is helping to prepare them for adult life. There is then the issue of the challenge of moving from childhood to adult life and the need for ongoing support and for access to opportunities and choice. And here I've put this thing, national policy. So in the UK, I think we can be proud. I don't think we succeed, but we can be proud that there is at least a policy of trying to provide supported employment, of providing adult education, providing support if people choose to leave the family home. It doesn't always work, but I think, again, that is something you need. You need a clear statement and recognition from whether it's from your national government, your state government, or from local services, that they are there to provide support and guidance. And the third point I think I would make is the importance that you and I take responsibility for our health. It may be difficult for someone with Down syndrome to always do that, to recognize that they're getting unwell, to then recognize what they do if they feel unwell. And so often, healthcare is at what I call this interface with social support. If your son or daughter is still living with you, you have responsibilities just to keep an eye, ensure that they keep well, that if they are developing an illness, that it's picked up, that it's treated, and so on. And the same would be true if they move to some environment where they're being supported by paid support workers. And sometimes that's forgotten. Now, I just now want to focus down on some of the issues, and I'm going to move and just illustrate this through research that's been done, just to illustrate the importance of research and how research actually guides the way that policy, practice, and treatments are developed. This is a very old study undertaken by someone called Collicott and his colleagues, and it asked the question, are the health needs of people with Down syndrome, the mental health needs of people with Down syndrome, any different from another group of people with intellectual disability but not due to Down syndrome? And it was one of the earlier studies that raised the question of dementia, finding higher rates of dementia, but also higher rates of depression. And you listen to Babley's story, you realize that's an important issue because it needs to be recognized. People need to be aware that someone with Down syndrome can have depression. But they found lower rates of what here is called conduct disorders, so behavior problems, and lower rates in people with Down syndrome of major mental illness. And they found no difference in terms of autism between people with Down syndrome and those without. Now, there's one area that, again, has been of interest, and I raise it because I think this is not very common, but all of us who work in this field have seen a small number of people with Down syndrome, usually in early adult life, who've developed something that looks a bit like depression, but probably isn't. And I've called it regression in young adulthood. And sometimes this follows something like a bereavement or a major life event. And it's usually a relatively gradual onset in which the person with Down syndrome slows down, there's reduced speech, they take longer to do things, there may be some fluctuation in mood, and it's a general decline. People worry that this could be something like dementia, but as someone else said earlier, this is usually a much too young an age to worry about that. It looks a bit like depression, but it isn't that. You worry, is it sleep apnea, is there something else going on? But the truth is, this is something that is not very common, but at present we don't understand. But I'm using it just to illustrate the way that I think you would expect your physician or someone to go about if your son or daughter develops something like this. You take a history, you take detailed information, and then you undertake something called a differential diagnosis. As a psychiatrist, I'd be asking myself, what do I think is going on here? What might explain what you have described, the change you have described in your son and daughter? Is it depression? Is it a major mental illness? Is it early dementia? Is it some underlying physical disorder? Is it something else that I sort of haven't thought of at this point? But this regression, often those can then be eliminated. This regression is something we don't properly understand at the moment. The problem is that none of us have seen very many people with it. And one of the points I think we need to do is in groups like this is begin to collaborate together. And if people start hearing about a small number of cases, we all work together to better understand the problem. But I'm also using this to illustrate that the point of research is you describe a problem, dementia, regression, depression, but then research tries to understand the cause, what I call the mechanisms in the brain that give rise, say, to dementia. Because it's only by doing that do you arrive at meaningful treatments and you develop new treatments. Within the field of intellectual disability, and some of you have talked to me about this in the last 2 days, there are a lot of very dubious treatments offered because many of you feel desperate. You all want to do the best for your son and daughter, and people sometimes play on that. It's terribly important that we make possible research so we can have answers to some of these difficult questions. Now, the issue that I want to reflect on now is this question of aging in people with Down syndrome. Some of you may know that it's often been argued that people with Down syndrome age prematurely. And in fact, in the literature, not many years after Down syndrome was first described, and when life expectancy was short for people with Down syndrome, people began to raise this question because there were a small number of people living a bit longer, people with Down syndrome, and people began to think that they looked as if they were aging prematurely. Now, this slide, however, has two very positive aspects to it. Firstly, it illustrates, this is a football team of young people with Down syndrome, part of the DS Active program in the UK, where Premier League football clubs, this is what Paul Zanon has been talking about, Premier League football clubs have supported these activities. And it's absolutely wonderful to see, and I've been to one of these occasions, and it's a really special occasion. And here's two older people with Down syndrome who got married And these photographs are kindly lent to me by or given to me by the Down Syndrome Association. But in a sense, the question that I'm asking, if you like, as a scientist, as a clinician researcher, is how do we understand the process whereby this young lad later ages, and is there something atypical or unusual about that we need to better understand? So what I want to do is just take you on a research journey, and I hope by doing that it will give you an understanding of this link with dementia. So I mentioned earlier, Alzheimer, who's a German neuropathologist, first described post-mortem changes in the brain of a person in her 50s, not with Down syndrome, who died and who clearly we would say now had dementia. And we now call it Alzheimer's disease, after Alzheimer's. And he reported special changes in the brain called plaques and tangles, and I'll show you a picture of those in a moment. Not long after Alzheimer's described that in this elderly lady, someone reported that if you look at the brains of someone with Down syndrome who's died in their 30s and their 20s and 30s, you begin to find the same features in the brain as Alzheimer had reported in this older lady who clearly had dementia. So that was an important and interesting observation. The other point to make relating to aging is although life expectancy has improved in people with Down syndrome, it's still not what you and I would expect for ourselves. So there is still something about life expectancy in Down syndrome that we don't understand. And thirdly, if you look at people with Down syndrome, and we've done some of these studies, there are certain features that appear that suggest these are features that appear as you get older, and we might expect to get them in our 50s and 60s, that you begin to see in people with Down syndrome in their 30s and 40s. So skin changes. We did a study looking at wrinkles by the side of the eye, and these increase as you get older. You find that increase occurring earlier in people with Down syndrome. Further sensory impairments, sensory neural hearing loss, cataract formation happens earlier. Menopause is a bit earlier in women with Down syndrome. I'm going to touch on physical exercise and obesity, and we know the risk of obesity increases as you get older. And then there's this observation about Alzheimer's disease. There are certain features that are against the aging hypothesis. For example, people with Down syndrome do not get vascular disease, and that clearly is something that increases with age. Now, I just want to touch on this study just to illustrate, again, the way that research works. We became interested in physical activity, and Paul mentioned the works of Alex Phillips, and he did his PhD with us. And he looked at 152 people with intellectual disability, aged 12 to 70 years, 79 of whom were people with Down syndrome. And he just got them to wear actographs and monitors for a week and then looked at their physical activity. And there are two important points here. One, to the shame of the UK, and that was that, first of all, people with intellectual disability, none of them met current UK government guidelines for levels of physical activity. It was appalling that in the environments they were living in, people were not supporting them to take exercise. But what was interesting is that people with Down syndrome were found to do significantly less exercise, particularly as they got older, than people with learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, for other reasons, that suggests that there might be something rather metabolic about people with Down syndrome that was affecting, particularly as they get older, affecting their ability and willingness to take exercise. And we went on to look at energy levels in people with Down syndrome. And this is something we looked at, what we call mitochondria function. This is something in every cell of the body that produces energy in the cells. They're called mitochondria. And I want to use this to illustrate a point that I'll come back to later, is that some of these advances are possible because technologies are being developed. So this is a technology called magnetic resonance spectroscopy. It's a way at looking at chemical reactions. In this case, we looked at muscles, so we got people with Down syndrome to exercise, and we looked at how long it took for certain chemicals to return to normal in the muscles. And what we found here, in this bar here, that people with Down syndrome, on average, took longer than a comparison group for their muscles to return to normal. And this is a suggestion, and there are other studies as well, that maybe there's an issue here about these energy components of the cell, the mitochondria. Now, it needs more work to explore further, but it takes you a step further. Because when you start to think about treatments, if mitochondrial function is a problem, then there are treatments being designed to try and manage those sorts of problems. So now I want to, in the last few minutes of the talk, just to move to the issue of dementia. I mean, dementia, as I think all of you will know, is a progressive loss of cognitive, what I call functional abilities, so the ability to care for yourself, to do the normal things that you've always done in your life. And this develops over time. Usually it occurs in later life. If it occurs earlier in life, usually there are particular reasons for that. Alzheimer's disease is but one form of dementia. It's probably the commonest form of dementia, but vascular dementia is another. But in Down syndrome, it is the commonest form of dementia, and I'll come back to the impact. The importance, of course, is if someone with Down syndrome, say in their 40s or 50s, presents with changes that sound a bit like dementia, you have to ask yourself, are there other explanations? So there are other conditions that are treatable that can mimic dementia. So if someone's going blind, or their hearing is deteriorating, or they've got depression, or their thyroid is impaired, those can mimic dementia. But so there is a process that if change is observed, one needs to undertake the necessary assessments. Now this is what I mentioned earlier. This is a slide under the microscope of a slice of brain of someone with Down syndrome who died with dementia. And what you find is these areas here, and these are called plaques. And those plaques are tiny microscopic plaques, are made up of something called amyloid. There are also other things here these are outside the brain cells, these are inside the brain cells, called tangles. They consist of something called tau, a different protein. And Alzheimer's disease, whether in the general population or in people with Down syndrome, really hinges around these two, the amyloid and these tau proteins. And again, I now want to take you through the story as how one is looking at this. What this slide shows is it's brought together a number of studies that ask the question, well, we know that from previous studies that people with Down syndrome get changes in the brain, they get the plaques and tangles, and these can be observed if people die as young as in their 30s, they can be observed in the brain. But does it make any difference? Because if it doesn't make any difference, it really doesn't matter. So in other words, do they, because of these plaques and tangles, develop dementia? So here is the percentage and number of people with dementia. This is the age of the people with Down syndrome. And these are different studies from America and our study from the UK. And what you see is very characteristic of dementia. But in an related rate is in the general population, but it's brought forward by about 30 or 40 years, which is rather suggestive of this premature aging idea. Very important to say that not everyone gets dementia. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's also very important to say that having made this observation, it's then very important to seek an answer to it. And that's really why it's important that you know about it and you know about the research that's going on. And ultimately, if your son and daughter did develop such a problem, you know what to do about it. Now, I show you this because research advances are made often in a rather serendipitous and interesting way. You're all aware that Down syndrome is due to trisomy 21, having an extra copy of trisomy 21. Well, in the late 1900s, in fact in 1986, as the ability to identify individual genes, what code for proteins in the body, advanced, what people did is they identified the fact that a particular protein, something called APP, or the amyloid precursor protein, was coded on chromosome 21. I've already mentioned amyloid and how amyloid is found in the plaques of Alzheimer's disease. So suddenly people realized that people with Down syndrome were producing too much amyloid. And this led to something called the amyloid cascade hypothesis of Alzheimer's disease. And the observation in Down syndrome and another observation, which I won't go into, was very important in helping scientists arrive at this idea. So too much amyloid, too much of this produces too much of that, and that leads to what's called a cascade of events, and ultimately to the increasing rate of brain cell death, and as the brain cells die, then the features of dementia develop. It's probably a process, it's over many, many years, and it may be going for some time before it actually becomes apparent. Again, as new techniques have advanced, it's now been developed. This is neuroimaging, brain imaging techniques. We can now look at this in a much more sophisticated way. This is what's called an MRI scan. It shows you the structure of the brain. This is the nose, the front of the face, and this is the back, the occiput. This is someone with Down syndrome. This is a different type of scan. It's called a PET scan. And what the PET scan does is allow you, by using a radioactively labeled chemical, to measure, to image this amyloid in the brain. This is a young person with Down syndrome, no evidence of amyloid. This is an older person with Down syndrome, and the red shows the amyloid in the brain. So we're now beginning to get the tools that allow us to better understand what's going on. Now, I want to take you to something very different before I just sort of round up my talk. I think I'm okay for time, am I?
Yeah, I think we have to, 1 minute more.
1 minute, okay. This is, now there's the possibility from skin cells of developing what's called stem cells, and those can be turned into brain cells, and they can be examined in the laboratory, in the dish. And we're working with a group that won the Nobel Prize for some of this early work on stem cells. And here shows some of the cells that were derived from a skin biopsy that someone with Down syndrome volunteered to give us, that have been turned into brain cells. And this is another technique that allows you to examine what is going on, in this case in the individual cells, albeit in the laboratory, because you can't look at these in someone's head during their lifetime. And we're at a very exciting time. And this slide shows how all these different things come together in one place. So here's the young lady with Down syndrome, and what we're trying to do is to say, can we develop a treatment so that she is not at risk for developing amyloid in the brain? This is just showing a schematic of of all our chromosomes, and chromosome 21, which was first described by Lejeune. And there are now treatments being developed that lower amyloid in the blood. These are entirely experimental at the moment. They're not available. But I want to tell you this because I think we should be optimistic. Even though the story about dementia is not a happy one, we should be optimistic that people are looking at ways of treating it. So I want to just end with these key points, really. Firstly, in thinking about the trajectory of someone's life, mental ill health and emotional problems do affect people with Down syndrome in adult life, including depression and anxiety. These problems need to be recognized when they occur, and they need to be treated. And those treatments may be psychological, they may be pharmacological, may be a number of types of treatments. There are two specific, if you like, mental health risks that seem to be rather particular to people with Down syndrome. One is this unexplained regression in early adult life, which is rare, but we don't yet understand what causes it. And then there's this risk of dementia in later life, which we believe is due to this excess amyloid. In all these cases, diagnosis can be problematic, particularly the diagnosis of dementia. And you as family can be terribly important in that, because in order to make a diagnosis, whether it's of depression or dementia, you need to have known the person over time. So if someone comes to me because of a change in their behavior, I need to know what they were like at their best and how they have changed. And it's through knowing that I can make a diagnosis and I can explain what's happened. And if there are treatments, we can instigate them. So if you ask what is needed of your services where you live, in the state where you live in India, well, you need, first of all, the knowledge that allows you to help maintain good health for now your adult son and daughter. So that's the nature of the living and support environment, the right diet, good exercise. You need people who are around that person to be aware about the risks of ill health, to help the person with Down syndrome recognize it if it's occurring and seek help. So it's about awareness. We have something called the Equality Act in the UK, which means that all people, that health services must adjust the way they approach people with special needs. So we have special easy read information in GP surgeries and so on. And people with intellectual disabilities have as much right of access to health services as anyone else. We need to better understand and we need to encourage research. Finally, I want to just say what the context in India, and you would expect this from me as someone who's both a clinician and a researcher. I can't, I think, emphasize enough the importance of research within the context of the culture and the country and the economies that you all live in. And it's important for you to ask yourself, do we know the age profile of people with Down syndrome in our patch of the country? What is the life expectancy here? What is the age-related morbidity, so illnesses that we're observing? What is the mortality? Are there particular factors within India that predict morbidity and mortality in this group? Is it something about diet? Whatever it is. What about societal attitudes and stigma? Is that an issue? Is that providing barriers and preventing people with Down syndrome having opportunities in adult life? Do we have the right support, access to employment? There was a lovely talk on self-advocacy earlier about the importance of these sorts of things. Do we have access to health promotion, health care, health screening? The importance of data is it provides a basis for campaigning and for policy and service development. You can say to your state or national government, you know, this is the situation here for people with Down syndrome. Do you know, just across the border in whatever country, they're much better off, or they do this or do that. Can't we do that here in India? Or you might say, actually, we do it much better here in India than they do in another country, and be proud about that fact. But I would urge you to support research, to collect this data, collect this information, and the Down Syndrome Federation of India is in a very good position to facilitate that. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Holland, for that lovely lecture. I think in the interest of time, we need to move forward because we have a very tight program. The closing ceremony will start at 5 o'clock and has to complete by 6 o'clock sharp because several people have got their flights to catch. I would now like to call upon Tejal Shah for a 5-minute presentation on AIDS. Visual aids which is going to be used, and following this we will split into 2 halls.
Can you hold from? Excuse me. Can you just stand with me? Because I need to show this. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Yeah. I'm Tejal Shah, and I'm a special educator with one of the inclusive Montessori Learning Center in Bangalore, wherein I'm handling children with hypotonia, autism, and cerebral palsy as well. I also have a child with Down syndrome who is 3.5 years old. So, as we all know, our children have delayed learning and a lot of concepts, for example, big, small, more or less, are difficult to grasp initially at a very small age. So while trying to teach my daughter these concepts, I found that there is no ready available tool at one place. And I really had to search the net, talk to a lot of people, and do a lot of research to get the right tool to work with her. So I found that there is a lot of significant value loss of time for all our children this way. So I along with 2 other special educators who have children with special ability have developed an educational toolkit, which is right now a starter kit, I would like to call it, where many of these tools are available in one place. So, we can use them to teach and also reinforce these concepts to our children over and over again. So I would like to take you to a few of these tools which we have developed of the primary level. The first is emotion cards. Is it? So as you can see, I have displayed 4 cards here. These are the basic feelings which our children find it really difficult to express. So with the help of this teaching aid, our children find it very helpful to, we help them to understand, and this tool helps them to understand and communicate the actual feeling they are experiencing. So I have, you can see that I have made 4, cards: happy, sad, scared, and angry. And once they are clear with these feelings, you can introduce other feelings like surprised. There are many more to that. I'll take it. The next very important concept, as I was talking earlier, like, the concepts like big, small, more or less, near, far, are very difficult to, understand initially. So for that, I have prepared a booklet which speaks about concepts from the basic level. So which I would like to call as math language booklet, which consists of concepts like big, small. I'll just show one of them. 1 second. So these are basically worksheets. I have clubbed it into a booklet, and might not be very clearly visible, but just try to show one. So for example, this is one worksheet. It's just the very basic, like the ball is big and small. So, the child can visually identify as to which is big and small. So simultaneously, I have given 10 worksheets to it so that with more and more practice, they definitely get the concept very clear. So similarly, I have other concepts like same and different concept. So the child has to, a lot of times they find it difficult to understand what is same, and what is different. So there are worksheets which I have presented, for example, in this shape worksheet. So you can see, sorry? Yeah. So for example, triangle. So they have to just find the same triangle. So initially, this is just a very basic level. So you can increase more number of shapes once you see that the child is clear with the very basic concept. Yeah, so similarly, I have other concepts here: tall, short, near, far, and all that. So in one booklet, I have done 10 worksheets. So if we practice more and more on a daily basis, I have seen improvement in the kids which I have worked on a longer run. So, but consistency is very important in this. Okay, thank you. Next is visual scheduler. So, visual scheduler, this really helps. I would recommend every parent to, make this at home, because it helps in developing routines. It reduces anxiety, and it helps in making the children independent. For example, like, since in the morning, if you want to explain the concept of what is morning to your child, you can make, like, I'll just show you my teaching aid. You can ask the child to, 1 second. You can show the child the sunrise in the morning, and then you can just make a picture. Yeah, I'm sorry. So I've just taken a printout of sunrise, and then you can ask him to just come and place it. In the morning, the sun rises, and then whatever the next activity you want the child to do on a daily basis and you want him to follow, you can do that and simultaneously have the pictures along with it so that you can ask him, once he finishes that particular activity, you come and paste it. So if he does this on a regular basis, they develop a routine, and a lot of anxiety also reduces, because a lot of time our children feel very scared as to what next is going to happen, and they get restless. So once we do this on a regular basis, so they get clearer and the anxiety also reduces. And slowly they become independent because they come to know as to what has to be done on a regular basis. So this can be done for morning, afternoon, evening. So I have made the entire booklet for morning, afternoon, evening. So all the activities which we can do with our children, which we are doing, so like brushing, restroom time, and after that breakfast, so taking baths accordingly. Next is safety cards. So as we all know that our children are visual learners. So, the above visuals help them to understand the safety rules better, and if explained one rule at a time with lots of expression, it really works faster. So, for example, you can see the first baby who is just touching some switchboard. So if you see the reaction, you can show the child what is the reaction, So they understand slowly once you show this on a regular basis. And they are clear about the safety rules. Next is the visual perception tools. So this basically I've developed to to improve the visual discrimination skills, the auditory perception skills, then recognition skills, and visual association skills. So in this, so I have made different charts of fruits, vegetables, transportation, etc. So there is a chart, and there is simultaneously we have the same whatever displayed fruits, vegetables are there, we have cards along with it. So the child is supposed to, we can use it in different forms. We can ask the child to match the particular, for example, an apple, you can match it. So, the child takes some effort, right? So the child discriminates between the other fruits, whether he's able to match or not, you can see, and slowly he develops that discrimination skill as well. So this can be done in alphabets. You can make alphabet cards. You can make with numbers. You can make with anything, like words, weekdays, so many colors. There are innumerable ideas you can think of. So same I've done with transportation, if you can see on my other slide. So this I have made with Velcro also, so that, while the child puts on, do I have that? I'll just see. Okay. So, I'm sorry. So, below each of the transport vehicle, there is a Velcro attached. So the other card which you need to, stick. While sticking, there'll be some sound coming and all that. So, it helps the child to tactile also. I'm sorry. So, yeah. So basically, it's a multi-sensory approach. They get a feel while touching the Velcro. Also, some sound comes. So they are more interested to do these kinds of activities. And simultaneously, they develop also the discrimination skills, as I told you, and association skills also. Next is housey game. I think everybody knows about the housey game. So I have just, made it according to the child's level. So we can take, like, I've made it for alphabets, numbers, to teach numbers and alphabets, words also. You can make a list, and the conductor just reads out the alphabets, and we have the tickets also. So the child has to circle or mark the particular letters spoken out, and whoever finishes all the marking of the particular list is the winner. So we can use this, and the child enjoys the game also and learns also how to recognize words and, letters, alphabets also. You can do it with everything.
Teacher,
So I
can
have
we
done.
wrap it up? Can we wrap it up because time's up now?
Just a last slide. So as I told you, this is the housey game. Then I have the sight word and CVC word teaching aid, wherein I have developed, so we can take just small chart papers and make it like envelopes. And this is like a fun activity for them because it is like very colorful. So we have different colors of envelopes. So, and we just, so to begin with, we give the child a word, okay? And I've used this ice cream sticks, so they need to just match the word, match the letters which are there on this, and they put it. So initially, it's just the word recognition, and slowly we can start making them read the particular word. So once that happens, you can actually ask the child to form a word by giving the ending letters, and they have to just fix in the first letter. So this is one kind of
I think
activity.
we can wrap it up now, ma'am, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll, because we're completely run out of time.
Okay.
Because
So
we have to close by 6 o'clock.
sure. So this is the last is sensory cards. So for different types of fields, I have just prepared this. So it comes like 12 sensory cards in one particular kit, which has different fields. So like soft, hard. A lot of times we are not able to. Our children are not able to understand as to what is soft, what is hard. So this is a particular way of teaching. We can make them feel, So that is all. And I have a lot of other teaching aids also. In case you want to know more, you can contact me. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rekha Aunty, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Now there will be parallel sessions here. I'd like to call upon the next chairman of the next session, Professor Hakim Arif.
Good afternoon. Shubho Aparanno in Bangla. I think in Hindi it is same. Shubho Aparanno. Okay. I welcome all of you to this session. In this session we have 4 papers. The first paper, the title of the first paper is Multimedia Education for Differently Able by Mr. Rakesh Dasmana. Now I am inviting Rakesh Dasmana to present his paper. Mr. Rakesh Dasmana.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Professor Hakim Arif, and beautiful audience, parents, professionals today. So, now it's okay? Audible? Is it okay now? In the last row, is it okay now? The voice is okay? Good. I have heard a few of speakers today, few of the parents, few of the professionals, and I felt like that I was discussing with my colleague that it was my loss not to be present here yesterday. And I think that I lost many biggies spoken here yesterday. I'm not a parent, not even a special educator, but I would like to share my journey of working with special children here with all of you. I represent a company called Ames Media. We are an education solution company. We are into developing curriculum, training teachers, making training to the students and all across the India, including all regular schools, play schools, universities, and colleges. I used to teach economics earlier before to come into this sector. And it was a time somewhere in 2010 when we went to our first special school and with a very good intent to do something for our special children. And unfortunately, the principal ma'am, she refused us and she said that because you are not a special educator, you can't do that. We went to IBHAS, we went to Vimans, Nimans, St. Stephen, Max, Apollo, Gangara, many of the hospitals. We met many psychologists, including clinical, cognitive. We read not only about the mental disability, we also read about mental illnesses, including schizophrenia, bipolar, narcissism, depressions, and all. We read about 52 categories of Down syndrome. We read about dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and all other different kind of challenges happening around in the world. After a research in 2010, we understand by the age of 14, all the families, they are more concerned toward the academic solution and therapy solution. And that's why, in context of them, they started doing some kind of experimental therapies also, including this, swimming therapy, horse riding therapy, dance therapy, movement therapy, and all, apart from, along with the scientific therapies. And once the age, touches like 14 and 14 plus, their concerns change towards from the academic to the independent living, sustainable livelihood, employment, vocational education. Then after this comes in the mind. And we generally used to meet all those families who have the children with 14 and 14 plus. We have seen in India, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, only the paper bag making, candle making, masala packaging, these were the options available for special children in the vocational education. We were not opposed of that, but we had a worry about the market size. We wanted to understand, who will buy the candle today? Not you and me. I will not buy a candle today on the regular market for my household needs. Even in the rural India today, the electricity is there, then who will buy the candle? Only in the occasions or in the churches? That not had a huge amount of volume in the market. We could understand, we thought can't we train our children in that particular area which has a huge market, huge scope, and we don't have to worry about the work opportunities. And then it started, after this research, we developed this India's first multimedia program for children with special need, including all categories. We call it AEMP, Ability Enhancement Multimedia Program. We built a team of 54 psychologists, special educators, parents, and all, and we developed that program. We start with the same program with that school who refused us in 2010. And then from the one school, now we have reached the 154 schools market today across India. We started with 5 children in that school, and now we have touched the life of more than 3,000 children. We have understand one thing, that multimedia is a need of everyone. You go to the panwala shop, you go to the automobile company, you go to the chemicals manufacturers, everybody, you go to the textile manufacturers, even though in conference, we required one multimedia educator to design all this stuff. Everybody need a small entrepreneur, or the large big companies, the multinational company, everybody need to design their office stationery, their visiting cards and all. So we started training the children about the computer graphics. We divided this program into 3 parts. We trained children not only about the multimedia, people think about this is computer. We started training children about how they can develop an advertisement without the use of computer, that is pre-production. Tare Zameen Par film, how many of you have seen? The start cast of Tare Zameen Par, when the fish and octopus come, bubble of water is there, that is clay animation actually, that we call this pre-production. The Jurassic Park movie where dinosaur is running, actors are acting with the dinosaur, that is VFX and something related to pre-production and post-production. We train our children in that. We custom the method according to the need of children. And then the next level, the children comes to the project base. Whatever they learn in the 18 months in learning period, we give them project. We bring projects from the companies and we give projects to the children inside of the schools. In today's market, if you go to the adults, special needs families and parents, they have only one worry. Every day I used to meet around more than 10 professionals and parents. And I have seen many of the institutions who are running since last 35 and 40 years. Today still they have a question about of employment opportunity of our children. I really wanted to say you one thing, the employment is not a challenge for our children. Because in today's market, when CSR is a policy for corporate houses, they are ready to recruit our children. But retention is an issue with them.